It is great to see everybody here this day. Let me fade out and prepare to share. Um, my name is Brian Rose, and I am the Chief Engagement Officer here at Auxano. And thankful to see so many familiar faces on here. Some of you I haven't seen in a few minutes, and some of you it's only been a couple of weeks, but some of us have spent hours and hours together, and some just a few minutes. But it's great to be here with you today, and serve the church in this way. Our mission at Auxano is designing trustworthy resources that fuel ministry by navigating clarity. And in doing so, we believe and lead with the idea that clarity isn't everything, but vision clarity changes everything. And therefore, these clarity first conversations are important and important for the local church. As you're jumping in here, just in the chat, drop your name, city, state, so we can see who's with us here. As always, we love doing that. Love the community that's being built around these conversations. And even as I was watching people pop into the waiting room, it's good to see folks in there and do that. This is also going to be where some Q&A can happen. So you might have a question that comes up while Mike and I are walking through the content today. Some of you, I know you're going to be very familiar with this content. You've seen it before. And then others may be just experiencing it for the first time. And so we'd love to, just engage the conversation around that and see what's going on there. As I mentioned, my co-host today is Mike Gamble. Mike is another one of our senior lead navigators on the team here. Mike is a native of Bozeman, Montana, and leads and serves the church from up there. Mike, tell us about Hebrews 11:1 and why when I ask you for a quote about vision, you gave me this verse.
Oh yeah, I love it. Well, so it's great everyone to be on the team, Brian. It's great to be on the podcast, the Zoom call today. Brian, it's
You know
great
where
to.
you are, Mike.
I know, right? So when Brian asked for a great quote on vision, I thought of Hebrews 11:1, large in part because of my work here in Bozeman. Just as a church member, just like all of you are in a sense of helping lead on a local church. I've been impressed by the importance of seeing collaborative discernment and vision casting conversations as a tool for disciple making. And as I've engaged that just in that on the ground level, I've just been reminded and reinforced that a lot of times this is a neglected disciple making tool. And it makes me think of Hebrews 11:1, where the author tells us, now faith is the reality of what is hoped for and the proof of what is not seen. And as we unpack the whole chapter of Hebrews 11, we see vision everywhere. God's vision for humanity and God's vision to use people and to co-create with us a reality that doesn't exist yet, but is coming. And God's invited us into that. So in that context, I think of visioning as is the dreaming and planning of our faithful obedience to the reality that God's creating in us or through us. And so this is in stark contrast to some of the vision planning and strategies that can happen in the corporate world, where it feels like it's just about growing the church bigger or making more money. Those are things.
Fixing problems, some of those things, right?
Yeah, exactly. Those are things. But what God's called us to is to make disciples and to be an instrument of God's kingdom in the world. That's his dream and his vision. And he invites us into that. So visioning, planning, dreaming, these are a faithful response to the obedience of what God's called us to do. And so vision planning in that sense is just part of the disciple making toolkit that God's given us.
Love it, Mike. And I love your heart in that for this disciple making call to do that. Mike is also our leadership team building expert on the team. Mike is well versed, and some of you have experienced Mike in our process through Insights. Mike leads out with 6 Types of Working Genius. Mike's doing all kind of things in the leadership and team building space. And so after the Q&A time, we're actually not going to share this on the replay. So this is just for being on here live. We are going to talk about 4 team dynamics that kill healthy conversation and collaboration. Some of you guys have seen this tool. We've just configured it, and Mike's going to share out of his experience there. So if you're watching this on a replay, sorry, you're going to miss part of that. That's just one of the bonuses of jumping on here live. We just want to thank you guys for taking some time out of your busy week to join us in this Clarity First conversation. So I'm going to pray, and we're going to get started with talking about what it looks like to have that 12-hour vision plan. So, gracious Heavenly Father, thank you for the calling you've placed on every one of these leaders that are watching this live, watching this by replay, Lord. If they're watching this Clarity First conversation, Lord, you have a calling on their life. Lord, you've placed them in a role to serve your bride, the local church, Lord, to lead others to know you, to lead others to make disciple makers, Lord, to be a catalyst for change in their community. So, Lord, just wherever folks are jumping in on this conversation from, Lord, I pray that you would just fill them with a sense of encouragement, Lord, a sense of possibility, Lord, maybe even reawaken a dream in them, Lord, reawaken a calling that when they said yes to you in whatever ministry form that is, from a high capacity volunteer to pastoring a local church, Lord, I pray that you would just reawaken in them, Lord, that calling, that first calling, Lord, to rethink and redream what you have called them to do and to be. And Lord, we know that in our heart, the plans are many, Lord, but you direct our steps. Lord, your word tells us that. And so, Lord, we just want to lead with that thought today. So thank you for this time we get. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So Mike, as you and I are working with leaders and walking alongside leaders all across the nation in all different kinds of faith tribes, what we see a little bit of maybe a shamefulness sometimes, but maybe regret sometimes, maybe hopefulness on the positive side. But in any case, there's this idea that we want healthier churches. We know we need more disciple making in our congregations. We know discipleship is a word that has been used to represent everything from a 40-person Sunday morning classroom environment to one-on-one or one-on-two D group, kind of environments that meet during the week. We've seen all those things. And at the end of the day, we run into a lot of leaders who really are wishing for a healthier, more mature church, but just not quite sure how to start planning for one. And so it's really kind of this tension of, like, and you mentioned it before, marketplace strategies. Like, sometimes we hear the word planning and we're like, oh, do we really get to plan in this work we do? Do we just have to completely rely on Holy Spirit work? And so this question came up as you and I were talking a few months ago, kind of leading into this. What if we could just kind of think about 12 hours and naming God's better future, like listening to the Lord, preparing, praying, collaborating, but also receive energy, like not feel like, oh my gosh, this is overwhelming. This is so much there. And so, that came up, Mike, in you and I's conversation about, hey, what if there is a way to do this? And so in doing so, we were kind of like, okay, well, what are some planning principles based on a tool that many of you are familiar with, based on the Horizon Storyline tool that's a part of our Oxano vision planning and even vision framing processes? Like, what happens when those principles come forward, Mike? And so I'm just going to jump right in, Mike, and just throw to you for the first principle, if that's okay.
Let's go.
All right, here we go. The first principle there is to dream up, out, far, and wide. Mike, unroll that for us a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we thought about this, the one of the first steps really is to establish that dream. And we think about this kind of in 4 dimensions. The first is that up connection, that we recognize as a church that we are part of a stream of what Jesus was inaugurating in his proclamation of the coming kingdom of God. The kingdom of heaven, as Jesus talked about that, all of our visions are part of that great stream. And so it has to be connected with that. What is God doing here and now and in us and through us? So we want this deep connection, this deep faith connection between what we're dreaming of, what God's dreaming of. If it's not from God, then we're laboring in vain. And so we have to first connect with that. But at the same time, we recognize that has an outward dimension. It's not just us and God. It also impacts the community. It impacts the broader group of our church that maybe not in the inner circle. And so this vision that we have, it connects with God's heart, but it also displays God's heart to not just our church, but our community as well. So that's that up and out. And so the next is this far and wide. And so this is where we think about the time frames. And so we think about looking far into the future. We plan from the future to the present. So as we dream, we think about 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. We may have a more condensed or precise thought, like, hey, just what's the next 1 year? But we're thinking about those time frames. We're thinking out. And then as we get closer to the present moment, this is where that width comes in, where we start to build out those details. And there is a kind of a width and a depth to the nature of those plans, and they become more detailed. But first, we think about connecting with God. We think about impacting our community. We think about dreaming and planning from far out in time, with a great wide scope impact in our community. And so we call this the Beyond the Horizon. If you've used the Horizon storyline tool before, the time frame 5 to 20 years. And post-pandemic, we even think, maybe even 3 years. But this is that long range vision planning. We're looking for one big idea. And for a lot of churches, this can feel constraining. But we want to use an example here from a client. This is a native Montanan. So this is actually a client in Montana. This is a church of about 200 to 300. So you want to get a sense of the scale of the church. And this plan was landed on in December of 2019. So just think about the time frame. Think about what's about to happen, but think about what we didn't know what was about to happen, right? So what we landed on was Beyond the Horizon vision of 5,000 meals in moments, like a neighboring vision. Their vision is to have 5,000 meals in moments with those who are near to us but far from God. And they invited all their church members to have these moments with God, with their neighbors, having these gospel conversations, gospel meals. They wanted to have 5,000 of them. And they felt like, at one point, we were playing with the idea of 5,001. So they're very, very much playing on this biblical example of Jesus fed 5,000 people with just a few loaves and fishes. Then we can have 5,000 meals, even though we're only a few. And so that's their one big idea.
I love that, Mike. And I love the up, out, far, wide represented in there. Like, first and foremost, that near to God's heart, but people who may be far in proximity for that. So this is kind of this, love your neighbor, the Christ leadership in that. But then across the community, everybody think about their neighbors far out, long down the horizon, 5 years out, but even wide. I mean, I think probably when something like this rolls out, the first question, in my experience, most teams have is like, okay, well, what does that mean? And what's a moment? Let's define those things. And that's why that wide scope is like, you know what? We don't have to understand everything right now. When the children of Israel stood on the banks of the Jordan River, they didn't know what a lot of the stuff they're about to experience is, but there was still that dream that was birthed in their heart. So I love the modeling of that example for us. And I know that along with a dream that's up, out, far, and wide, Mike, we have to then chart big ideas that get us there. Unpack this for us.
Right. So we call these the background strategies that are the pillars that are really going to help drive this success of the vision. We want to bring that Beyond the Horizon vision into reality. And there are truths that we're going to have to manage. Changes we're going to have to manage. If the vision is going to happen by itself, it's not a vision. If we can't name a vision as just something that's going to happen. And so these background strategies, we think about these as 3-year initiatives that are are realities we're going to have to manage, or obstacles we're going to have to overcome, or opportunities we're going to have to seize, things that we're going to have to change and make some difference on. And so, Brian, you go ahead and flip to the next slide, and you're going to see for our example here that we have 4 big ideas here: leadership development, growing church, hub groups, vision alignment. So the big idea here is these aren't something that you're going to fix in 90 days. And they may even not be something that you're going to start working on for another year. But the team recognized, if we're going to have a church where we're having 5,000 meals and moments, and every church member has a testimony of a gospel conversation, a gospel meal, then there's some things we're going to have to do. We're going to have to start having some leadership development that we don't have. The church did not have a shared annual or biannual all-church leader gathering to develop leaders. They installed that, and they knew it's not going to be something we just do one time. We're going to have to keep doing it to equip people and train people. So that was a new skill and capacity, and so it gets its own bucket. It's a background strategy. The second big idea was, hey, if we're going to have 5,000 meals, we're going to have to grow a little bit. Now, we don't have to become a church of 1,000, but it would sure help if we grew some this year to have more people to help us have these gospel conversations. And so they have a reason to grow. And there are some things they needed to figure out there. And then hub groups is this is their small group environment, is what they called that. But they're reorganizing their small group environment around neighborhood structure, around neighboring that's conducive to this vision of sharing meals and moments with people who are close to us, but far from God. Now, it may be too simplistic in logic, but the people who are closest us to, but farthest from God, are often our physical geographic neighbors. And so they just said,
family members, right?
Yeah, that's right. So they just reorganized that. And again, this is not something you switch to overnight. This is something that's going to take years for us to accomplish. And then vision alignment, they recognized this isn't something that happens overnight. First, our congregation needs to know what our vision is. They need to share that vision. They need to own that vision. And then we need to align our budget with the vision. We align our staffing, how we spend our time. So again, it's a skill competency that's going to take years, that even though that might have an expression today in terms of an immediate action, is going to be a series of immediate actions that are going to take years to fulfill. And so these are just 4 examples of background strategies. And we don't do 5 or 6 or 10 because we know that if we try to do too many things, we're not going to do anything at all.
Yeah.
And if we have too many ideas on the table, then we haven't really identified the core ideas yet.
Mike, I know one of the things that keep we think long range and things that may are just beyond kind of the moment we're in. One of the techniques we've seen leaders use to keep this in front of people, to keep it white hot, is some sort of visual, some sort of representation, some sort of tangible, even tactile piece of this. What I love in kind of preparing for this is how this particular church has done this. Tell us what we're looking at here on the screen.
Yeah.
Looks like they're.
Yeah, I love it. So they had some of their handymen in the church literally build the picture that you see here. And so if you were to go into the church foyer, the first thing you see on the wall is this: "We love our neighbors." And it is a physical wood structure. And every little gray dot inset on the 4 letters of love is a large, like 1/2-inch head screw. And what they've done is they've invited their church members, every time you have a gospel conversation, a gospel moment, or a gospel meal, go ahead and take one of those screws out. And there's 5,000 of those screws in there. And so they're just taking them down as they march through time. And they're giving people a way to share their story so that they can put those testimonies on the website. So they have several every month. And their current count is 1,972. And so because of this vision, this church of 200 to 300 is at 1,972 gospel meals or moments with people who are close to them but far from God, in part because of this vision. And this is just a way to encourage their membership, to help them see the progress, to hold them accountable. Leaders can see those screws coming out, and they can see those testimonies, and they can share them from the stage or the website. But this, again, it's that marker of what we measure grows. And this is a way to measure that and to celebrate it.
Mike, one of the things that is as we process this, coming back to kind of this moment here, two things. One, these are scalable concepts, right? You told me this church is not a mega church that has 5,000 meals and moments is going to be accomplished because there's 2,000 people. Tell us, how big a church is this that we're looking at here?
Right. So it's a church of 200 to 300.
Okay.
And that was, pre-pandemic.
Got
And so I kind of alluded that too, just a little bit. They landed on this in December of 2019. And when I caught up with them, as the pandemic was rolling, their heart was God gave us a gift here, because as they moved into the pandemic, it was just, hey, church, we just need to dive that much more into our vision.
Yeah.
And the whole pandemic drove the need and validated the value of where God was leading them, and very much became part of what they're doing. So you don't have to be a big church to have a big vision, but if it were a church of 5,000, then they could have had 25,000 meals. So you can easily scale that up.
Yeah. So I love that, and it's almost as if God knew what was ahead, and even when we didn't. The other piece of this too is, because we're talking about this in terms of a 12-hour plan, what we're looking at right here, these two pieces of this, would you say roughly in your work with this church and your facilitation and kind of strategic outsider as a vision strategist, this is about, kind of coming up with this beyond the horizon and the background strategies, anywhere from probably 4 to 6 hours worth of work, hands-on in a collaborative setting with a team. Is that about right?
You mean just these first two rows?
Yeah, just those top two, far off rows.
Yeah, in my memory, this took about 8 hours to get this top done, and then the bottom, which we're about to look at, took the other 4 hours. And Brian, sometimes the top half comes easy and the bottom half is harder, and sometimes the top half is harder and the bottom half comes easy, and that's my experience anyway.
Yeah, that's why I think that, as we lead with clarity first, and kind of we lead with tools and process, not just best practice and statistics. Well, you should be doing this because this is what some other church is doing. It really accounts for exactly what you said, that, hey, no two churches are the same, nor should they be. And so the personalities and leadership and even community persona, some of those other things that play into that, like the reality is like, we need to craft the vision that the Lord has for that church, not just borrow some vision from some other church and go, well, it worked over here, so we're going to use it there. And so that's, I think, the important piece of this is to kind of understand that, when we talk about 12 hours, it can even take a little longer than 12 hours, a little less than 12 hours. Although, I think when we include times of prayer and being Berean in the Word, the more time you take, the better. You don't microwave a brisket, right? And so, we want to slow cook this idea here of where God is leading us. Yeah. Let's get into some of the shorter term pieces of this. I think number 3 is focus with regular rhythms here. And really what we're talking about here is just a mid-ground focus, just bringing forward something on a regular basis. What are the rhythms of, hey, how do we stay in front of our church team, in front of our whole body of believers? So we think about this mid-ground horizon as a focus for everyone in the church, sometime on a 12 to 18, maybe even sometimes a little less than that, regular basis. And so it's not as long range as what you just unpacked with the church. It's not as thinking that far out in the future with those strategies or that dream, but it is saying, hey, there's one thing that as a church we're going to be focused on together for this next year, as we lean in here and say, hey, this is where the Lord is leading us. And that could be a school year, that could be a fiscal year, that could be a calendar year, whatever is just that regular rhythm that keeps your people focused and keeps really kind of leaning toward this beyond the horizon, long range call that God has put in front of us. Now, listen, I'm about to show an example, and I know that the pastors may be still on this webinar, and so we're gonna lean in here of like, hey, this is a fresh one that right now this church is in the middle of a year of prayer. Although they didn't land in finality with these words, when we kind of finished this time of planning, they were saying, hey, listen, here's our big vision for the year. We're going to pray. And I got to tell you, as simple as it sounds, it was revolutionary in there. So I'm so proud of those leaders and kind of what they're doing and some of those things. And so praying as one as a church body, again, 1 year focus, like, hey, this is what we're doing. 5 minutes personally, 5 minutes even in a service, and kind of setting up some pieces of that. And then with our families, praying together in our groups and some of those things. And so really, again, for this church, it was, hey, how are we going to focus in this next year? And I'm so proud of what they have done. And we'll look at that in a minute, of just kind of how they've executed on that, how they've kept that visual, how they have really kind of seen the Lord at work, even through some really, really tough times in the middle of doing that. So it's really kind of a cool thing. And here's how we keep that going. Here's how we keep that fresh, Mike. We work in short bursts. We have foreground initiatives we put out there. We have these 90-day initiatives that we kind of lean in and work at. And we say, okay, listen, what in the next 90 days, what's most important to accomplishing this mid-ground focus? What's most important to keeping this one focus in front of our people? How do we really kind of, continually work on what's happening here? And so I love this idea of saying, hey, listen, every 90 days, we're going to think about, what does it look like to do this? What does it look like to really kind of think in those 12 to 18 months? We're going to think in 90-day bursts as we walk through it. So it's short range, it's very strategic, and once again, no more than 4. Listen, if we can do 5, that's great, but why not get something done before you do that? And so just to kind of bring a couple of those examples back up here, it is, once again, for this year of prayer, they knew the staff and the vision team needed to work on that. They wanted to structure it at a large scale and small scale. They even knew that there was a prayer team that needed to develop in the church, as well as, kind of thinking about their long range vision rollout. What's fun is I just got to be yesterday. I was on site. This flip chart photo could not be more fresh of walking alongside a church yesterday here in my home state of Tennessee, and really doing an update with them. So this is 90 days in. And if you look, what's really fun is those short range bursts, those working in those bursts, big green check marks on the first 90 days of accomplishing this idea that they were focusing on for the next year in context of this big 125th anniversary vision. You might see there. You don't have to understand that. What I want you to see and feel is, when we spend 12 hours in planning and start to execute, start to lead from that call that God placed in that season, that collaborative work, we start to see disciples made. We start to see kind of the working happen in front of us. In fact, when we put these big green check marks at the end of our session, one of the team members who's on the team has been, is not only popping in once a month or something, is in the church office every day, said, until we put those big green check marks, I didn't realize we'd accomplished as much as we had accomplished. And so working in short bursts like this is pretty critical. Mike, here's the whole Horizon storyline. Here's that whole vision plan, that whole 12 hours of planning. Bring us kind of a close on that. Let us get a little bit of a wrap on what that looks like there.
Yeah, excellent. And first, I just want to make a comment about the church that had the year of prayer. I just want to highlight one of the things I love, because it shows us the breadth of what kind of vision and focuses and emphasis you can have. And it breaks the myth up that all strategic planning is about growing your church bigger.
Yeah.
Which again can be a thing, but how often do our people get the benefit from us saying, this year we're going to pray? And that is 100% vision for us to.
By the way, that grows your church.
It grows your church.
What you're thinking, right?
Right, exactly. And so for this church in Montana that did the 5,000 meals and moments, they were like, hey, the first thing we need to do, and again, this is in December of 2019, we need to develop the skill in neighboring. And we need to inspire, equip, and empower our people to get to know our neighbors with intentional prayer, gospel conversations, and share meals. And like, that's just like this is a sense state. We need to get our folks on board with the vision, but we need to inspire, equip, and empower. Like, it's not going to happen just because we preach a sermon. And we have to do way more than that. The sermon is just the beginning of it. It's the tip of the spear. There has to be a lot of weight and structural changes behind it. And so that's where those foreground initiatives come in. So the first set of foreground initiatives, they realize first thing we need to do is we need to create like some definitions. What do we mean by a meal? Does it count if I just go to dinner with somebody? No, that's not what they're thinking. And what does a moment mean? And so they realize we need to have really clarity around their definitions and create some staggering goals. They believe they're going to do more, like half of their meals are going to be in the last year. And so like if we can do 250 in the first year, that might be a win. And then we'll do 500, and then we'll do 1,000, and then we'll do 2,000. So they realize we need to stagger the goals. So that's definitions and goals team. They realize they need to create a communication plan. They need to do neighboring training. And then they need to create this reporting mechanism, which I've already shown you with the board in the church with we love our neighbors and the screws. Like that was the reporting mechanism that they took out. And if you go to their website, you will see the testimonies you can click on and read. Those are because people are submitting testimonies to a mechanism that team gets and then can report on. So that's where they had the green check marks. And then they replace those with others. I'm not showing those to you here, but this is the plan they came up with in 12 hours.
Yeah. I love that, Mike. And, come back around to the differential of being just a best practitioner planning group versus, a vision planning, group where it is kind of leaning in here to, what is God, putting in the hearts and minds of our people in that season, and just thinking about neighboring before we knew that our neighbors were going to be kind of the only source of contact we had. There's another example of that here. This kind of rewind, the top half of this Horizon storyline was established pre-pandemic, right? In fact, it was January 2020 when we put on here a fully functioning online ministry. Needless to say, that moved from a background strategy to a foreground 90-day initiative. Right. But I loved it when I was going to go back, when I went back and kind of refresh this with them, then you can see the bottom half, on the far right, on that bottom, celebrate all God has done in 2020 despite the challenges. That was actually a 90-day initiative for them to kind of look back and do kind of one of those ancient practices that sometimes as leaders we forget, but was so critical in the life of the early church, was to celebrate, right? To stop and celebrate, to take a few days and go, look what God has done. Remember all that God has done. Lead our children back to that stack of stones and go, let me tell you how God has worked and moved in this congregation. And so I love the fact that we get to do that, and that's a piece of this. So here's how that works. Typically over 2 to 3 days, depending on the structure of the church, depending on getting team together, we usually do about 12 hours in that. This is our vision planning process. Most times, we're there on site facilitating. I'd say that's kind of the best way. What I love about that is it takes the pastor out of or another person on the team as a facilitator, planner, preparer, and moves them to participant. Lets us dive into the experience, Mike, the uniqueness of who we are and how we have led that. Usually there's about 9 to 12 folks that are in this conversation, in this collaboration setting. We develop that 1-4-1-4. So what you and I just both showed, Mike, is that, and we do schedule follow-up coaching calls. We scale it to the context of where we are. And so we always, really believe, Mike, you and I have the wonderful privilege to serve in the way we do as salaried employees, not contract employees. And so we have the ability to really meet the needs of the local church. And that's, trustworthy resources that fuel ministry by Navigating Clarity because of our calling. We can do that. And then, this is an exclusive toolbox. This is a proven toolbox we've used. We've trained a few others in it, but the reality is that, there's nothing like it. Mike, anything to add as I kind of flew through those bullets?
Yeah, well, again, just the look at the fruit of investing to around 12 hours just on the previous examples that we saw. You can't, sometimes folks will say that's not enough or it's too much. one of the things we've learned is you can't really rush insight, and it takes time. It rests on a team, but our experience is that a lot of times you can really get it in that 12 hour mark that produces the kind of plans that we've been looking at.
What's funny is there are moments. I've always said this. There are moments when you can microwave some clarity,
Yeah.
like February, March, April 2020. Like, yeah, we need vision quickly, right? Because we're in this season where we've got to have a fast response. But for the most part, apart from those quick moments when tragedy strikes in a congregation or in a community, the lasting calling is that longer. Again, think of it like smoking meats, which is something I do here in Tennessee quite often. Of just like it takes time and really kind of that crock pot, not a microwave idea. If you got more questions about that, maybe you jumped on here and you're not as familiar with this tool, or maybe haven't been a part of our processes. One of our team would love to talk to you. You can snap this code real quick, fill out a simple form, and somebody from the team will be in touch, and we can talk about what 12 hours might look like in your context, a couple days in a row, or maybe over a 2 or 3 month process of prayer and some of those things. So there's just a kind of a quick and easy way to jump in there on that. I haven't seen any questions come up from the Q&A. So if anybody wants to throw something in the chat right now with a question, I might have seen a hand go up, and I'm not sure that was on purpose earlier to do that. Mike, what's one of the questions I get a lot in a process, kind of when I'm talking with a pastor or leadership team, they kind of want to know, okay, it's really funny. They find a way to kind of go, tell me about a failure. Tell me about when this didn't work. Tell me about what happened on that. Mike, give us, 30-second answer. How would you answer that question when it's presented to you in a conversation? And then I'll answer some questions from the chat.
Yeah, so I think it's a great question. It's an important question. And the reason why it's important because it reflects the need to understand better what vision is for and what vision does. Vision is really about organizing our obedience to what God's calling us to do. And if we're obedient, then that's really, honestly, that is the success. Now, the question, though, is, well, what about the objective?
Organizing our obedience to what God has called us to do?
Right. Organizing our obedience to what God's called us to do. And so I would say that is the success we're looking for. And if it's the right plan, then we're going to say that pushing in that direction is success, period. Like the outcomes, the organizational outcomes, the leadership outcomes, those are something separate from actually just obeying what God's calling us to do. Now, so really quickly though, sometimes the team gets in over our skis where we dream and we go for this vision that's just not, we're shooting for the moon, and we do this moonshot, and that's just a mistake from a vision planning perspective to create a plan that we can't possibly do. See 400% growth for 10 years in a row just is not a thing, right? And you wouldn't even want that if you had it, even though it might sound dramatic. And sometimes it's just a failure of, we don't really quite understand what dreaming is for. But the other big picture is, like, a lot of times we see failure, it's because teams don't work the plan. We make the mistake of thinking that because we dreamed, we did this 12 hours, great experience, we grew spiritually, now we need to do it. And so there's an execution moment that no plan is going to work itself. This isn't going to happen unless we do things, unless we change things. And so there is that execution side that is 100% necessary.
Yeah, it goes back to the old Maxwellism. Everything rises and falls on leadership, right? And so
right.
Ability to not just have a plan, but to lead to that. By the way, if you're on this Zoom right now or watching the replay and you didn't write down organizing our obedience to what God has called us to do, we can't be friends. I'm sorry. Because I have never heard that before out of Mike's mouth. We've been on this journey together for 12 years, and that was brilliance right there in that. So Mike, thanks for answering that question. We had a couple pop up. One of the questions is, what are things to consider as you renew mid-ground focus? So as you renew that 1 year mid-ground focus, Mike, what do you suggest things to consider in that?
Yeah, I love that question because it reflects that we have somebody who's working the process and who's thinking like, how do we march closer to that beyond the horizon? And the thing that I do every year, and it's a quick exercise. I've spent 30 minutes on it, is just a quick health check on the plan itself, on our vision. We're like, how are we progressing? What's working? What's not working? What's confused? What's missing? And by doing a really quick scrum on that, just the evaluative tool to name reality
Yeah.
and then do the same thing about our vision. Like, what have we learned about our vision in last year? I find that if you refine your experience of reality and you refine your experience of what God's called us to, that a lot of times their next step will just jump off the page. Now, it doesn't always, but 50% of the time it's just, well, that's obvious. That's what we need to work on. And this is the next thing we need to do.
Yeah. Mike, I come back to as well. One of the exercises that we use quite a bit is just kind of when a church has a articulated vision frame in renewing that 1 year focus. Sometimes it's helpful to kind of go back to each of the four sides of that frame
Right.
and hey, how are we doing with our mission? You know, you saw me use the red light, green light, yellow light tool on that 90-day renewal. I'll come back to the vision frame. Hey, how are we doing on our mission? How are our people doing? And seeing that as a personal calling to be sent. How are we doing on our outcomes, formerly called measures? Like, are there any of those that are kind of dipping down, or we feel less than on that? How about our strategy? Are there places where we feel gaps in our strategy and people kind of engaging the next step, or even our values and our leadership kind of? And so usually, sometimes in one of those areas, we can sense a calling to, hey, on the next year, because of our outcome of we want to be, we want to love our neighbors, and like then all of a sudden a 1 year focus on neighboring or something like that can come out of that conversation. Next month in May, we're going to come back around and look at a great book that helps kind of tie strategy and measures together, even the kind of the assessment of our outcomes and kind of how we're doing in that, and looking at Clint Grider, another one of our team members, his book Mind the Gap, which really leans in hard to really making sure we're accomplishing what we're called to accomplish in the lives of people. And a lot of times in those conversations, Andy, the 1 year focus emerges of, okay, yeah, our people are really, man, we've done a survey, we've done some processing here, and sharing their faith, like everybody to a T has kind of the lowest on that. So we need to spend the next year building gospel conversations into the regular rhythm. We need to do trainings. That focus begins to emerge in some of those conversations. I think you can also, as Mike said, take a step back and look at the long range, beyond the horizon background strategies, and ask, is there anything in the next year that's important that we see kind of embedded in those things? So I mentioned vision frame, and another question came up offline outside the chat of, like, is the 12 hours inclusive of vision frame? And categorically no. The vision frame, you think the kind of 12 hours for a vision plan is crock pot. It takes a lot longer to dig in many cases and really articulate a clear call of mission, develop values that are really going to create culture on our team. By the way, that's, culture is driven by your values. And, if you don't have clear and developed values, then, culture kind of gets a little squishy, or even strategy and kind of how we accomplish this calling or those outcomes in the lives of people, of disciple making outcomes. Like, that takes a little bit longer. That's a whole process unto itself. Now, we have stepped into the vision planning, that 12-hour retreat, independent of that, even with churches that don't necessarily have it. In fact, the example I showed that I was just with yesterday, when I was doing their 12-hour retreat, one of the things that came up was they really didn't have corporate values. And so one of their first 90-day initiatives was to develop values. And so that was one of the big check marks was, hey, we have developed values. Now they're going to be defining with this next 90 days. Yesterday, we said, hey, listen, we need to embed those values in every ministry and staff member so that they can lead from those, again, creating that culture in there. So 12 hours is really just working on that 1-4-1-4 horizon storyline. It's not the vision frame and some of those things. And so that's a great question that came up there. Andy, glad that was helpful. We're going to say thanks for being here to everybody who's watching the replay. And this is going to be kind of where we stop the replay. But Mike, because we have you on here, because we have folks, we're gonna move with some deliberate haste into this idea, Mike, and just tap into your expertise that there are 4 dynamics that always kill healthy conversation and collaboration on church teams. Like, we can count on it. Like, one of these 4 dynamics will keep your team from collaborating in process and outside of process. We've seen this. It comes from our Collaboration Cube tool. Some of you may have seen this in the past. You may not have seen the new one. Mike, let's just jump in there. The first dynamic that you've led us to is power posturing, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So power posturing.
Power posturing.
Yeah, I mean, so power posturing is when one of our team members or a small coalition of our team members, they dominate the conversation. This is where people use the meeting to let everybody know they're in charge.
Yeah.
And now I know that none of the people on this call have ever done that, but maybe you've been in a room where that's happened, where we want to contrast that with a humble team keeps position, status, and polity in check. Now, it doesn't mean we ignore things like position, status, and polity. Those are realities of all of our church governances and our models, and we want to respect the position of the pastor, so on and so forth. But the humble pastor recognizes that, hey, I have something to learn from the layperson in the room, and this meeting isn't about me displaying how smart I am or how much I know about a thing. And so power posturing every time will shut a meeting down. It'll shut collaboration down. And sometimes even a moment can take an hour for the team to kind of get over. And so it's something you really need to take a check on, or keep a check on.
Yeah. And that Collaboration Cube tool, Mike,
right.
As we how to use it, kind of does. It kind of establishes humility. Here's the second one: evaluation apprehension. What is this one, Mike?
Yeah, so this is almost the opposite side of the power broker kind of situation. This happens when a team member is concerned that their contribution will be negatively received. This is where they see like there's an elephant in the room, but they don't want to be the one to name it. So they're afraid, like maybe if they display their ignorance, if they don't understand what's being talked about, if they just see things differently. So a safe team, on the other hand, builds and protects the trust needed for every member to bring their contribution. Yes, and so Janet has named it. This is absolutely psychological safety. If you read different leadership books, Google kind of pioneered this language about 20 years ago. This is what we're talking about here. But evaluation apprehension is like the other side of it, where this is why psychological safety is important. The safe team really helps people know we actually want to hear if you don't understand. We actually want to hear if you disagree. It's important to talk about these things because not only are you going to bring important information to the table, we're also going to fill in gaps in knowledge. It's really, really critical.
Yeah, I think Janet's dropped a couple of references to this in there, which is good. And we see this, right? We see that sometimes, it's like, oh man, we're afraid to contribute. We're afraid to speak up because we don't know. And so humble team, safe team. We also want another kind of team when we're doing this. It's the positive team. Tell us what the dynamic is, Mike, and then how do we kind of work against that?
Right. So intent judgment is this experience that we have where we do make this contribution and we feel like it's a safe team. And so we jump out and we say something we're a little bit nervous about. We may have a little bit of, we feel vulnerable. And then the team just misunderstands and assumes they know what we meant, rather than asking questions. And so intent judgment happens when a team member experiences the frustration of their intent being misinterpreted. Again, this is where they're trying to support an idea, but someone feels that you're undermining it or sabotaging the idea. And so a positive team defaults to seeing the best intentions in each other. And rather than just assuming that it's an attack, they can say, oh, wait, help me understand how that, are you supporting my idea or challenging my idea? Help me interpret that. The Collaboration Cube is really brilliant on dismantling intent judgment because it gives us the language to test that in a way that doesn't scrape against people's egos. Yeah.
And really what we do on that, Mike, is we kind of remind everybody when we use it that We want to challenge and affirm ideas, not people. And that's
Right.
both the positive and the negative, right? We can actually be overly positive in affirming people instead of ideas and really misrepresent the idea that, hey, listen, it's not the person necessarily, it's the idea, but really then what that allows us to do is when there is conflict. And by the way, are we really working hard enough if there's not a little bit of, good versus gooder discussion on there? You know what I'm saying? If we're not really kind of leaning in there. And so I love that, like, we can have a little bit of healthy conflict and really challenge the ideas, not the people. We got to move past assumption and anecdote and really kind of get into, okay, what's really going on there? I love that. Here's the last one. Here's objective drift. This image, I've never seen this church team before. Actually, I was on this church team, and every one of those 5 people at some point in my ministry life.
That's all at the same time. Right.
Get us into those.
Objective drift has happened to every single one of us in any team meeting. This just happens when a team allows a conversation to continue to stray off track. Now, to be clear, starting a side trail is not objective drift. Sometimes we need to test sidetracks, and sometimes we need to take a little mental break. That's not what we mean. What we mean is where the team is having a hard time staying on task, and where we see this the most is when we are thinking category about one idea, and the team wants to talk about a different idea that's not actually relevant. And so the focus team shares a clear understanding of the purpose of the conversation and is able to correct itself and say, we need to put that conversation in the parking lot. We're not ready for that conversation yet. I know we're excited around solving the problem. We need to stay where we are right now. Or conversely, where we're right now, we are tactically solving the problem. We're out of the wonder phase of this conversation. We're now in implementation. And so the focus team really stays on task and is really guards against objective drift from sidelining, sidetracking the success of the meeting.
Mike, that's where that tool like Collaboration Cube comes into play. And in fact, even in this image, you can see on the top, there's that dream conceive mode, that blue sky when we take off the limits, and then the discuss challenge mode, which leans into those kind of collaborative personas. Then, what you can't see in this, axonometric is the bottom is that decide commit. There's a moment where decide commit is needed. And so that keeps the team focused. I love those words. We want to cultivate in collaborative vision planning conversations, a humble, safe, focused, and positive team to really kind of lean into God's better future on that. Mike, thanks so much for some time today. And I want to thank everybody for jumping in this conversation and joining us. I hope this has been a little bit sharpening. I hope it's been beneficial. I hope maybe you've been challenged on something, maybe affirmed in some way, maybe even some questions piqued. Once again, don't hesitate to reach out to us if there's something we can do, even just to getting in a conversation of, okay, so here's what I'm thinking about, what help me out with this. Our team of navigators loves to get to do what we do, and we're so thankful to get to do it. Mike, once again, thanks for your time today. Thanks for jumping into this conversation. Everybody have a great rest of your week. God bless you, and lead strong into summer.